Hello everyone, I'm Wendell Jones and welcome to this special tribute to the life and times of the late Darrell E. Rolle on Jones and Company. On Jones and Company, we normally address the national issues, and on our program today, we thought that we would pay special tribute to the life and times of Mr. Rolle, who was an outstanding member of Parliament and a cabinet minister in the Bahamas. We have assembled a group of his friends and former colleagues to speak about his life in the Bahamas and his contributions to the development of our country. A native of Low Sound, Andros, Mr. Rolle read law at the University of London, graduating with honors in 1969 before entering public life with the Progressive Liberal Party. Following the death of Clarence A. Bain, Mr. Rolle became one of the youngest elected legislators on record when he succeeded Mr. Bain as the Member of Parliament for the Mangrove Key constituency, Central Andros, in a by-election in 1971, and served in the House of Assembly until his retirement in 1997. He served as leader of government business in the House for a while, and during his distinguished career, spanning some 26 years as a member of the government, Mr. Rolle served as a minister in the Pindling cabinet, heading several government ministries. He served as Minister of Transport in 1974, Minister of Home Affairs, 1974 to 1979, Minister of Labor, 79 to 1977 to 1979, Minister of Education and Culture, 1979 to 1982, Minister of Works and Utilities from 1982 to 1984, and Minister of Housing and National Insurance from 1984 to 1988. He also served as Minister of National Security from 1990 to August of 1992, when the Progressive Liberal Party was defeated in the general elections. And so Darrell Rolle was the youngest cabinet minister ever and one of the longest serving ministers in the Pindling cabinet, eclipsed only by the late Sir Clement T. Maynard. Mr. Rolle was a trusted and loyal Pindling PLP and an ardent supporter of the progressive movement in the country. He played an active role in the formation of numerous public policies, the establishment of many public institutions, and the passage of scores of pieces of legislation that together form the modern Bahamas. Philip Brave Davis, the leader of the Progressive Liberal Party, called him a good and faithful servant of the people, and he said the PLP as an organization thanks Mr. Rolle for his public service as he transitions to receive his eternal reward. On our program today, you would hear from Dr. Elliston Ramming, who served in the Ministry of National Security with Mr. Rolle. You'd also hear from the chairman of the Progressive Liberal Party, Senator Fred Mitchell, former cabinet minister George A. Smith, Mr. Leon Williams, a former president of BTC, an organization that Mr. Rolle had a whole lot to do with in terms of Minister of Works and Utilities. And we'd also hear from a good long friend of Mr. Rolle, Father James Moultrie, a former ambassador to the United Nations.
My fond memories of my brother, the late, the Honorable Darrell E. Rolle, stems as far back as 1972, when he graduated from law school in London and he came home, back home to the Bahamas. The late Clarence Bain had passed away as the Member of Parliament for Central Andros, and my brother was chosen as the candidate to run for the Progressive Labour Party in that by-election by Mr. Lyndon Pinling. And history would say that he won that election by a very large margin. My brother has served this country in basically every capacity that we can think about. He served in basically all of the ministries in the Pinling government and cabinet. My brother was the fourth child in the family and the oldest brother. We will miss him dearly. He was extremely important to us as the oldest brother in the family. He was actually the go-to person in the family. If we had to make a very important decision, if we had a problem, if we had to make a decision that we were not able to make by ourselves, we definitely would call on our brother, and he would lend his assistance as best as he can. My brother is best known, and he will be remembered for the contributions that he has made to Andros. To Andros as a whole. He represented North Andros, he represented Central Andros, and of course he represented South Andros. My brother believed in education. He was an advocate for education, and so he made sure that Androsians from the length and breadth of Andros got the opportunity to get scholarships and to go off to school and to come back and to make an invaluable contribution to this country as a whole. In my opinion, my brother was the finest son of Losang, and of course, the finest son of North Andros. And history can actually back this up. My brother has made a contribution that has inspired his siblings and his nieces and nephews to actually aspire for higher heights and to actually consider politics to a certain extent. We will dearly miss him. He will be sadly missed by his family. And I just hope and pray that we, as the remaining family of the Honorable Darrell, will strive to make the same contributions that he has made at a greater level and at a wider capacity that he has already made to this country.
My brother-in-law is more than a brother-in-law to me. I shall remember him more as a brother than a brother-in-law. He's a very caring person, very supportive at all times. But I shall also remember him by the work he has done in our country, the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Honorable Darrell was a nation builder. He was a visionary. He was a reformer. He was a philanthropist. And Darrell Rolle was an empathetic person. He cared about people. I remember first working with him in the 70s. And around that time, he seemed to be, to me, not your regular politician. Because, you know, we have, generally, politicians, they tell you what you want to hear or what they think you want to hear. You make promises that aren't kept, and we make excuses for having not kept them. It brings to my mind one of his colleagues. One time we were having a conversation regarding him. And he said to me, "Your brother-in-law is not a good politician." At first I was taken aback. I thought that was not complimentary. It was not a good thing to say. He is one of the best. But he went on to say that he thought one of his shortcomings was that instead of focusing on those people who supported him, namely PLPs, since he was a PLP MP, he focused on trying to help everybody. And I think that is more of a compliment when we take that into consideration. Because indeed, I remember Uncle Darrell, as we call him affectionately, saying to me, "Ozzy, you have to remember, I am not the member of parliament for the PLPs alone. I represent all of the constituents, whether they PLP, FNM, or whichever party or candidate or representative they may be supporting. It doesn't matter. I'm a Baptist, but I don't just serve Baptists. I have to serve the Baptist, the Anglican, the Catholic, the Methodist, Presbyterian, whichever denomination they come from." And that's the kind of person that he was. So it is very clear then what his colleague was talking about was that Darrell fit more the description of a statesman than a regular politician. Because all a politician wants to do is win. And so he or she would do whatever they have to do to win. That was not Darrell. He was concerned about people. He loved helping people. And as I mentioned at the beginning, he was empathetic. Darrell would go to, or Uncle D, as we call him, would go to every funeral in Andres, it seems, if it were possible, because he wanted to be there to support the bereaving families of Andres. And what was also unique about him is he loved to tell stories. And as a preacher, it reminds me of our Lord and Savior, who always told stories. Darrell was like that. Anyone who knows him will tell you this. He goes to a funeral, and the families will always make provision for him to have an opportunity to bring some remarks. And Darrell will always have stories that everyone can relate to. The good thing is all of those stories had messages. All of those stories had a meaning to them. And Darrell will tell the kind of story that will encourage people to be builders of their own community, their own country. He believed in the self-help approach to life. And he led in the building of the schools. You know, you had the North Andrews High, the Central Andrews High School, and Darrell helped in terms of leading in the building of an auditorium and parks where the young people can go and play. And that's how I will remember him, as someone who cared about people, who was empathetic, who was a nation builder, who was a visionary, who was a philanthropist. It's the kind of person that he was. And so if we would use that as an example, if we would use that as an example, even as politicians, we will have a new kind of politicians going forward, where we would be empathetic and help others, not just go into politics for what we can get, but for what we can give. And that was Uncle Darrell.
Let's now listen to a tribute from Dr. Elliston Rummy.
Like Bahamians everywhere, I was saddened and shocked by the news of the passing of the Honorable Darrell Rolle. I guess I first met Minister Rolle in the early to mid-70s when I was a news reporter for the Tribune. And he was, of course, a member of Parliament, and I covered his many debates in Parliament. Then I went off to finish college and university and came back. And as it turned out, in the late 1980s, I was hired by the government of the Bahamas as consultant advisor on crime within the Ministry of National Security under the Honorable Paul Adderley for a brief while. And then Minister Rolle became my minister. It was a pleasure to work with him on a daily basis. He was very thorough, very meticulous, and he had a vision for the entirety of law enforcement, be it the police, the prison, or the defense force. In fact, many of the advances that we take for granted today, certainly within the prison and the police force, can be traced back to the Honorable Darrell Rolle. And then, of course, he was a loyalist not just to Sir Lyndon Pinling, but loyalist to the conventions and the values that helped to shape and make the Bahamas what it has become. Of course, he encouraged me to enter frontline politics. I had no desire to do so at the time, but as a result of his cajoling, I ended up as the candidate in the Golden Gates constituency in 1992. And so we've had a very long relationship. He has been a mentor to me. He is one of the Bahamas' finest sons, no question about that. And he will be sorely missed. And I just hope that he can receive the kind of send home that is befitting his life of service to the Commonwealth of the Bahamas.
And now we listen to this tribute from Mr. Leon Williams, a former president of BTC.
I was very sad when I heard the news that the former minister, Darrell Rolle, had passed. And I want to take this opportunity to express my condolences and my sincere sympathies to his family. When you look at the annals of BTC and look at some of the historic dates, I think there were a number of those that pop out. One would have been 1892, which would have been the advent of telecommunications services in the Bahamas, when the government of the Bahamas and the joint venture built a submarine cable between Jupiter, Florida and Cable Beach. The other significant date to me in telecommunications would be the passing of the 1966 Telecommunications Act that created the Bahamas Telecommunications Corporation, trading as Batelco. And then in 1968, when Sir Arthur Fox, then responsible as the Minister for Batelco, tore up the agreement between Page Communications and the government of the Bahamas and appointed the first all-Bahamian executive management team, headed by the general manager, Ari Knowles, with the assistant general managers like Aubrey Curlin and Bob Bartlett and the rest. I think as I fast forward and I look at the period between 1985 and 1988, when Darrell Rolle was the minister responsible for Batelco. During that period of time, Batelco would have established many of the platforms upon which we now operate. For example, in 1985, he had, serving him as chairman, he had taken over from the former minister, Loftus Roker, but he had serving as chairman Addison Key. Addison Key is the longest serving chairman of Batelco. He served for almost 10 years plus. And in 1985, when Addison Key came to the chairmanship of Batelco, the first thing he did was visit Grand Bahama and found out for the first time that Batelco did not own the telecommunications facilities in Freeport, Grand Bahama, and that Batelco could only operate on the outlying settlements, although it had its headquarters on Pioneers Way. And so he made an offer to the Grand Bahama Telephone Company that was at that time owned by Contel to buy them out. So once Minister Rolle came in as the minister responsible for BTC, in 1985, that was like the first thing on the agenda, to have one telecommunication company within the Bahamas. And so the negotiations started in June of 1985, and by 1986, while Minister Rolle was minister, Batelco purchased the Grand Bahama Telephone Company for $10 million for its assets, and an additional $1.46 million in terms of its long-term debt. And so back in 1985, 1986, Batelco was in the business of buying telephone companies, not in the business of being sold. When you look at Batelco under Darrell Rolle as minister and Addison Key, you would find that the first thing they began to do, BTC started building the microwave networks, the inter-island networks. And so they went to Eleuthera and built the networks from Greencastle all the way down through the various Exuma Key, Stengel Key, all the way down to Farmers Hill in Big Exuma. They also built the network down into Cat Island. They went into Andros and did the same thing. Once they built the microwave network, they were able then later on in 1986 to go and start installing digital telephone networks, exchanges. In Nassau, they basically did the same thing. So while he was minister back in 1986, Batelco would have installed the exchanges in Pinewood Gardens, South Central. They would increase the facilities up in Camperdown. They would have taken the overseas operators at that time that was using the plug-in switchboard and converted them to tops, 4 tops positions. And so they would have also diverse the locations by having operators in Poinciana Drive, operators up in Camperdown, and operators in Delaport. They also transferred that into Grand Bahama and into Governor's Harbor so that you have multiple operators. When you dialed 0 to get an operator in the Bahamas, you really never knew who was answering the phone and the location of the person answering the phone to connect your call. During that time, in 1986 to 1987, Minister Rolle, while being the minister for BTC, Betelco, would have also introduced 7-digit dialing. So prior to that, people dialed 5 digits. And I always can tell people who grow up in the 5-digit area, when you ask them what their telephone number is, they will say 32. And then there will be a pause, and then they'll give the remaining 5 digits. In addition to that, Betelco installed an earth station up at the Soldier Road office. And that earth station allowed the Bahamas to be connected internationally to the rest of the world, although it had its submarine cable that connected New Providence into Grand Bahama and then into West Palm Beach. But at that point in time, the backup was the Intelsat system. In addition to that, it provided direct connectivity to carriers in the European market. That all happened under Minister Darrell Rolle's watch. In addition to that, when I look at the numbers, when Minister Darrell Rolle came to BTC, the revenues were sitting somewhere around about 58 million. By the time he left, the revenues were almost up to $79 million. In addition to that, there were 2,000 plus staff. And during the year, each year, 1986, 1987, you would note that an average of about 700 staff, up to as much as 1,200 staff went off for training, so that the staff coming back, technical staff, could install these networks. The networks were all installed by BTC executives. And my final thing about Minister Rolle, in 1988, Betelco installed cellular services in the Bahamas. 2 cell sites in New Providence, and by the end of the year, they had some 234 customers. And Minister Rolle made the first phone call on the cellular network back in 1988. And so, fond memories of Minister Rolle during our 100-year anniversary, the 20-year anniversary, as well as the 50th anniversary of Betelco becoming BTC in 2006. We honored him. Thank you very much.
This program will continue after these messages.